And so it begins. After a couple of issues irrelevant to everything, we are directly going to be addressing the fallout of what happened after Robotnik was defeated. And hopefully, in this instance, it will actually take its time and allow us to soak in everything that's happening. Like this cover. Soak it in, folks, because you're getting a very good example of what happens when a good artist, like Pat Spaziante, has his work ruined by a bad artist, like Ken Penders. While Spaz did handle the pencils and inks for this cover, the painting was handled by Ken Penders, and as you can tell, the colors sort of don't help the scene. It would be a pretty simple, decent scene otherwise, but the shading and shadows make them seem strange and off, especially Tails. Poor kid looks like he needs a shave. We open up on Oh My God, Not Again. It is really amazing how many times this series seems to think it's necessary to remind us of the entire series' backstory. Once again, we get a 2-page spread that essentially just brings us up to speed, in a very broad sense, on everything that has happened from the coup to the present day, after Robotnik's defeat. It's unnecessary, especially with how many times we've been reminded of this already. And they still have the text pages taking place before the story proper starts, so it feels really superfluous. The story proper starts with Sonic and friends, and also Jeffrey, exploring the ruins of Robotropolis, finally taking a moment to contemplate the magnitude of this moment. They've beaten Robotnik, but the world is still going to take a long time to heal, and they're still trying to take in everything on a personal level. They make their way into Robotnik's throne room, preparing to secure it, when, of course, Sonic and Jeffrey immediately get at each other's throats. Thankfully, the argument is short-lived, as Tails and Hershey say that they hear something coming towards them, and a panel in the wall opens to reveal a Dynamic, one of those robots from the train back in issue 31. It grabs several of them and starts whirling them around like a demented windmill, with Sally calling to Sonic to start using Plan C, which involves him moving so fast that he leaves after images of himself around to confuse it by projecting his heat signature to those after images. It's science fiction at its finest. However, Rotor's more interested in what's behind a nearby curtain than the killer robot trying to crush them. It turns out the man behind the curtain is Snively, still around and looking horrifying after Robotnik's defeat. He makes a run for it, but Jeffrey uses a trick arrow to catch him in a net, while Sonic and Bunny use some good old-fashioned teamwork to take down the robot. Sally leaves Snively to Jeffrey to see if they can pump some information out of him, while she and Sonic walk off, saying that she has to go and check on something. Turns out that something was her old room, where the window is boarded up and it's been transformed into what is essentially just a storage room. The sight and the memories make her start to break down into tears as she looks it over, and while Rotor remains behind to make sure nothing happens while he works on a few things, Sonic, Tails, and Jeffrey decide to give Sally some privacy as she takes everything in, Sonic and Jeffrey even sharing a brief moment of camaraderie over their shared worry for Sally. We cut to the following morning, where Sally is assigning jobs to everyone for the reconstruction effort, having Bunny and Antoine head out to find a source of fresh water, while sending Rotor to find a working power source, and Sonic and Tails are sent scouting to see if there's anything dangerous still lurking in the city. After they take off, she tries to tell Jeffrey what he'll be doing, but it seems he's already gone off on his own without telling anyone. We cut over to the skunk, where he's speaking with the king via video chat. The king is still partially crystallized, and while he's back in his right mind, it seems he's gotten quite surly since the last time we saw him. In fact, he's directly telling Jeffrey that Uncle Chuck is an enemy. Like, he doesn't even try to be subtle about it, he just flat out calls him a dangerous radical, citing his invention of the roboticizer, and his establishment of the spy network as prime examples of why he can't be trusted. Dr. Quack needs to come in and basically force him to relax to stop his ranting, while Jeffrey closes the link and informs his soldier not to let anyone in this room, especially Sally. Then we cut back over to Chuck himself, who's actually starting to tear down the spy network, packing away all the old surveillance equipment he was using to keep an eye on Robotnik. Then he heads down into the sewers to find a massive society of underground roboticized Mobians. Apparently, yet another side effect of the Ultimate Annihilator was that the explosion somehow restored the free will of all the Robians still living in Robotropolis. No idea how that works, and they don't go into detail about it. Among them are Sonic's father and mother, Jules and Bernie respectively, who, despite being told about Robotnik's defeat, are still bummed about not having their original forms anymore, despite their free will. Chuck explains to them that unfortunately they won't be getting back to their real forms anytime soon. The original roboticizer used on them has been destroyed. Even if he could build a new one, or even rebuild the old one, if anything were to be tweaked or changed even slightly, there would be a chance that the machine could end up altering their genetic structure in a pretty horrific way. Most of them are surprisingly okay with this, one of them even commenting that, as a veteran of the Great War, being a robot has done wonders for his health. Everyone seems in agreement that it's time for them to stop hiding in the shadows and move on, robots or not. Cutting back to Sonic and Tails, they see a large contingent of SWAT bots carrying a bunch of crates into a facility, loading them onto conveyor belts. The two of them muse that the robots are not only ignoring them, but they also don't seem that interested in anything other than their current tasks, as though they were programmed to continue doing this long after Robotnik was gone. Sonic worries that this might be a part of a long-term plan, like the trigger phrase that almost wiped out the world before, but Sonic can't seem to figure out that plan at the moment. Their musings are interrupted by a sudden cry for help down a hallway, and the two dash down there to discover Arlo and Penelope there, with Arlo trapped beneath a thick slab of rubble. Sonic attempts to drill through with his super peel-out, but it's just too thick for him. It isn't until a roboticized bear named Rudyard shows up and yanks the boulder off of him like it's nothing that he is saved. Other roboticized citizens come out of the cave system behind him, and Chuck immediately introduces Sonic back to his parents, who Sonic hadn't known were even alive. His reaction is immediate and visceral, reacting with anger at this being kept from him, and he dashes off before his parents even really get the chance to speak with him. Chuck doesn't really blame him for being angry, as he expected him to react this way, though it really was pretty sudden, both the introduction and Sonic's reaction. Bernie encourages Tails to go after Sonic, seeing as he could use a friend right now, while Chuck leads the other Robians back to where Sally and the others were staying. Dylan and Hamlin are cautious about the situation, though Sally welcomes everyone there with open arms, promising to do everything she can for them, glad that everyone's all together again. Rudyard, unfortunately, states that things probably aren't ever going to be the same again, not while there's this metal shell separating the robots from everyone else around them, though Chuck insists that they all just need a bit of time to adjust. Cut over to Sonic ranting and raving about Chuck keeping his parents' survival a secret, especially since he had told him that they were casualties of war, heavily implying that they were both dead instead of living in Robotropolis. Tails takes the moment to display some rather good wisdom for Sonic, though admittedly the speech does feel a touch out of character coming from him. Maybe it's just the way it was worded, I don't know. Either way, he makes it clear to Sonic that even if he had known his parents were alive, it probably wouldn't have changed much, or might have even caused Sonic more distress, like Sally's situation with her father. Sonic does calm down after that, and the two of them start to return to base back in Robotropolis. Cut back to Sally, sitting away from the rest of the group as she muses to Nicole that it might just be impossible for them to restore the city to what it once was, as the job just seems far too big. Nicole tries to assure her that there are always alternatives that she hasn't explored yet, just as St. John shows up, offering to sit down and talk with her if she needs a friend. To her credit, Sally does take the opportunity to let him down gently and make it clear that while she does see him as a friend, her heart lies with Sonic. Jeffrey even seems to accept the gentle rejection with dignity, though he does go in for one last kiss, something that the newly arrived Sonic does not take well. Cue the fight scene. I guess Sonic's emotions were still riding high. Rather than trying to explain that it was a misunderstanding, Jeffrey fights back, and the two really start to go at it. Like, it's an all-out brawl, yet again, to the point where Bunny and Antoine have to get a fire hose to get the two of them to stop fighting. While Sally scolds them for their childish behavior, the two make a show of shaking hands, but both make it clear that their rivalry still isn't dead, even though it really should be at this point. Cut to later that night, where Sally is in her tent speaking with her father via video call, making it clear that she's taking orders from her father and then acting as though she's the one in charge. While she questions why he can't just directly address his subjects, he just brushes her off by saying that he has his reasons and she shouldn't question him as her father or her commanding officer. Nicole tries her best to comfort her by reminding her that this isn't the first time she's had to keep secrets from her friends, and that that's the burden of leadership. And that's the worst advice you've ever given, Nicole. Who would be hurt if she told her close friends that her father was giving her orders in the background? Explain to me the logic in that, especially after everything that they've been through at this point. Anyway, Sally goes to sleep, clearly still distressed, something that she wouldn't be if she actually talked to someone and got some help sorting out those feelings, and things only get worse when she goes to talk to Chuck the next day, finding that all the Robians have voted near unanimously to split from everyone else and form their own colony. Sally tries to convince them to stay, stating that they belong with family, but Rudyard states that they've been hearing some pretty unflattering whispers from the organics around town, and think it might be safest if they weren't around here for much longer, even making the distinction between their kind and Sally's kind, only widening the gap between them. And we end on a ship taking off to the Devil's Gulag, with Snively monologuing that even if they all think they're safe, with him shoved in a tiny cell like this, well, they aren't, and he's still got plans for when he manages to get out. This special honestly feels like a bit of a transitional issue, almost like it would be the issue that takes place between parts 1 and 3 of a larger story. There are a lot of good elements about it that I do like, and it leaves us with a lot of plot hooks for the future. The capture of Snively near the beginning doesn't really amount to much, and is initially disappointing since it seems like he's being taken out of the game completely, especially since he doesn't appear again until the end of the special, but when he does, him reaffirming that he is still dangerous, even behind bars, does intrigue me enough to see what he's going to do in the future. The major thrust of the issue, that being the situation with the Robians, is a really good setup, but it did feel pretty rushed, even with the massive 48 pages of ground the special covered. While we're told a lot about the discomfort between Robians and Mobians, we aren't really shown a lot of that tension, save for a couple of panels with Hamlin, who's never been a pleasant character to begin with, so his words aren't really worth much. There's a lot of worry from the Robians about how things are different, but we aren't shown why they are different beyond the obvious separation of robotics versus flesh and blood, which makes it very difficult to accept the separation when the robots are made up of friends and family of our heroes. Everyone on the team knows that these are ordinary citizens who have been turned against their will into robots, so really the conflict here feels more manufactured than anything. I also don't understand why Jeffrey and Sally aren't a bit more suspicious about the King's state of mind. I mean, the last time he was that aggressive, he turned out to be a replica robot, and while his crystallized form might have regained his sanity, all this ranting and raving should probably convince those around him that maybe he isn't really in the best state of mind to be leading anything. At the very least, they'd probably want to take his orders with a bit of a grain of salt after everything that's happened before. On the positive side of things, Sonic's moment with Tails was actually pretty good. It was a human moment, a character moment, something that I really don't think we've been getting enough of in this comic for a while. I do still think that the way Tails speaks in this scene is a bit out of character, but his words are meaningful, and if the scene had been allowed to move at a slower pace, it would have been even better. Sonic's sudden shift in this scene from angry to okay shows off a bit of a pacing issue, since so much information is crammed into the story, and his immediate reaction to Chuck keeping his parents' survival from him was understandable, but again moved a bit too fast. I also don't like the fact that beyond the single meeting where Sonic just ran off, we don't even get any sort of heartwarming reconciliation between Sonic and his family at all. On the negative side of things, can this rivalry between Sonic and Jeffrey just end already, please? Look, having two characters that don't like each other who fight all the time is fine, but it's how that dynamic is utilized in these stories that I don't like. It's almost like the natural instinct of everyone involved is to immediately resort to violence at any provocation. Even in the middle of the mission at the beginning of the comic, the two of them were already goading each other. In this instance, their brawl later in the comic could be written off as Sonic still not completely calming down. And I will thank Sally for having the decency to make it clear that she isn't really interested in Jeffrey romantically, but at this point, yeah, the fight was only there for the sake of having a fight to keep their rivalry going, when a few words from Jeffrey, or Sally for that matter, about what they had been talking about would have shut down the conflict immediately. It's almost like Ken doesn't know how to write characters when they aren't in conflict with one another or aren't playing off of someone else's established characters or something like that. So the story is a bit of a mixed bag. There's a lot of good potential setup here, but it's a lot of telling instead of showing, and it has the characters ignore lessons that they should have learned from everything that happened during Endgame in favor of setting up for obvious problems later down the line. While the more emotional beats of the story, such as the separation between the Robians and Mobians, and Sonic's reaction to his parents, didn't have the space they needed to breathe properly. I know this is a 48-page special and all, but you could have sacrificed a bit of page real estate from other scenes to have Sonic actually confronting Chuck, or talking with his parents rather than having a needless fistfight with Jeffrey. I know that they might address some of this stuff in later issues, but packing so much of it in the special and then leaving it all hanging feels more like a cop-out than anything else and leaves the issue with very little satisfying resolution. Which is fine when the regular comic book has a multi-issue story, but in a special like this, having some sort of resolution is important, and I feel like the situation with Sonic, if it had been spread out more through the issue and allowed to breathe more, could have been a great through line for the entire story. The artwork, on the other hand, is much less mixed. It's not that good all throughout. Ken Penders not only was the penciler for this issue, but he also inked and lettered the issue too, in addition to writing the thing. The coloring is pretty good, but that's mostly because it's handled by Barry Grossman. Ken's usual difficulty in keeping consistent facial structure and anatomy are on full display here, all through the issue. Tails, I think, gets the absolute worst of it, as his face never looks right throughout the entirety of it. There are also moments where I swear it looks more like a reference was traced rather than just, referenced, though I can't confirm that one way or the other. There are moments where the artwork does seem to get a little bit better, which I thought was strange until I looked it up. Turns out Pat Spaziante actually contributed several pencils to the issue as well, but went completely uncredited. Not that I can blame him, as I wouldn't want my artwork mixed in with Ken's and have people know about it either. This issue did help us to establish a new status quo though, and show us some of the big plot points the comic would be taking on moving forward, so that is good. So next, we're moving on to issue 53 and seeing if they start addressing some of the things they brought up in this special. I'll see you all next time.